Corruption trial hears millions of dollars received by Rafael Hui. Debate heats up over future fuel mix. And G7 leaders threaten tougher sanctions on Russia over Ukraine.
Good evening. We begin tonight with the corruption trial of former Chief Secretary for Administration Rafael Hui and 4 others. A government prosecutor today accused Hui of receiving more than $28 million from the management of Sun Hung Kai properties while in public office. Diane To has our top story.
The defendants, among them Rafael Hui and Sun Hung Kai Properties joint chairman Thomas and Raymond Kwok, arrived in court this morning. In his opening remarks, prosecutor David Perry quipped he hoped the jurors would bear with him because he would likely go on until early next week. Perry said the case was about standards of integrity in public life, concealment of important information from public view, and about secret and disguised payments made to a very, very senior public official in Hong Kong. The prosecutor pointed out how Hui allegedly received multiple payments from Thomas and Raymond Kwok that were disguised and made in a very elaborate way. This includes routing the money through the other 2 defendants, Sun Hung Kai Properties Executive Director Thomas Chan and former stock exchange official Francis Kwan. Perry said the defendants knew one another well and trusted one another to keep the payments secret. The prosecutor showed the jury a personal letter written by then Chief Executive Donald Tsang, sent in 2009 to Hui after he left the Executive Council. The letter expressed deep gratitude for his service, describing Hui as dependable and helpful. But the prosecutor said what Tsang didn't know was that during Hui's time as Chief Secretary for Administration and IXCO member, he received millions of dollars in secret payments. Among them, $8.5 million just days before he officially took up the post in 2005, $4.6 million of that on the morning Hui was sworn in. Perry told the jurors Hui also got to live in 2 co-joined luxury flats in Leighton Hill for free, received unsecured loans from a Sun Hung Kai subsidiary, and was negotiating a lucrative consultancy contract with the developer while he was managing director of the MPF Schemes Authority. The authority was negotiating a lease renewal contract in a building that Sun Hung Kai had a stake in. The prosecutor said he was making a simple case. Imagine the benefit to a property developer if you have a representative at the government table, your man within government, someone who can tell you what's going on when he's supposed to be going against you. The case continues tomorrow. Diane To, TVB News.
The Environment Bureau insists buying electricity from the mainland will not cause instability in Hong Kong's power supply. A public consultation exercise on changing the fuel mix in power supply will end in a few weeks. Stephanie Choi reports.
Hong Kong will stop burning coal for electricity in 2017. The government has launched a public consultation to decide whether 30% of the future fuel mix will come from the electricity grid in southern China or increase the use of local natural gas. Some are concerned about the stability of power bought from the mainland. That's because, on average, there's a 3.2-hour annual power cut in the grid, compared with 3 minutes in Hong Kong. But Secretary for the Environment Wong Kam Sing believes that's just a misconception.
There are certain biased or not so accurate information being shared in society. So the government should take a role to proactively clarify certain understanding.
The government claims that much of the stoppage on the mainland is caused by the instability of power grids at the local level, not the southern grid itself. The government added that right now the cost of buying power from the grid is about the same as the proposed increase in natural gas in the fuel mix. Officials also said the price fluctuations of natural gas over the past few years will eventually lead to higher electricity charges. CLP played down concerns that Hong Kong would be crippled if there are any problems relating to electricity bought from the mainland, but is against relying on the grid.
If the power supply in southern China is disrupted, everything will run, and we can rely on sufficient backup in Hong Kong. If there is a power disruption in southern China, Macau basically will be suffering the same fate as everybody else in southern China because they have no backup.
A green group said more information is needed.
We were told only, the costs are almost the same between two options. We should be given more information on the future electricity tariff.
The Environment Bureau has so far received more than 10,000 proposals, and the public consultation will end in the middle of the month. Stephanie Choi, TVB News.
The LegCo Finance Committee will soon discuss a government funding request for an incinerator in Chekuchao. Similar incinerators have been used in Macau for years, and the amount of pollutants they generate sometimes exceeds the acceptable standard. Jenny Lam reports.
The two chimneys where one of Macau's incinerators stands mark the skyline on the approach to Taipa. Hundreds of tons of rubbish are first stored in trenches and then burnt gradually. In the process, the chimneys belch out more than 10 types of pollutants, including hydrogen chloride, heavy metals and dioxin. To minimize pollution, the rubbish is burned at 850 degrees Celsius for at least 2 seconds to break up the organic materials and dioxin. The air that comes out is then meant to comply with European Union standard. Raymond Lowe, a senior technician at Macau's Environmental Protection Bureau, explains that much of the white smoke is just steam. The energy generated from the incineration can produce more than 28 megawatts of electricity every day. That's enough to power the incinerator itself and to supply more than 33,000 households. Macau has 2 such incineration centers. In 2011, one of them produced hydrogen chloride levels that exceeded the acceptable standard. The Macau government explained that it was because they were trying to get rid of a large amount of PVC. The government tried to impose a fine of 87,500 patakas on the company responsible, but the firm took the case to court, and so far it has yet to pay up. Jenny Lam, TVB News.
U.S. President Barack Obama has waded into the debate over the June 4th Tiananmen Square crackdown. In a speech in Poland yesterday, he stressed liberty should not be taken for granted.
On the same day, 25 years ago, that Poles were voting here, tanks were crushing peaceful democracy protests in Tiananmen Square on the other side of the world. The blessings of liberty must be earned and renewed by every generation, including our own.
The White House also issued a statement calling on China to better protect the human rights of its own people. Beijing hit back. The Foreign Ministry said the U.S. should stop making irresponsible remarks on issues relating to the country's internal affairs. A spokesman also said Beijing reached a conclusion over what happened in 1989, a long time ago.
Leaders of the G7 industrialized nations have decried the use of intimidation by any country in territorial disputes. On the first day of a 2-day summit in Brussels, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe reportedly pushed the G7 leaders to single out China. Their statement, however, did not specify any country. This comes after a Hague-based tribunal asked China to submit evidence to support its territorial claims within 6 months, based on a complaint from the Philippines. China rejected the ruling. Foreign Ministry spokesman said Beijing has no plans to do so. China's separate disputes with the Philippines, Japan, and Vietnam have worsened since last month when it deployed an oil rig in waters claimed by Hanoi. On Ukraine, G7 leaders have threatened to impose hard-hitting sanctions on Russia if it doesn't help restore stability in eastern Ukraine. More on that from Alan Buknia.
What would normally be a meeting of the G8 became the G7 after Russia's exclusion, following Moscow's annexation of Crimea. So far, the U.S. and the European Union have imposed what's seen as relatively minor travel bans and asset freezes on Russian officials. French President François Hollande is one of 3 European leaders scheduled to have a private meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin tomorrow. Hollande said this G7 meeting is a clear signal of unity to urge Russia to stabilize the region.
In diesem Zusammenhang haben wir
German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who also has a private meeting scheduled with Putin tomorrow, said if the situation in eastern Ukraine doesn't change, a new round of sanctions could include restrictions on trade, finance, and energy. In Russia, Putin again denied that the Kremlin has anything to do with the separatist insurgents in eastern Ukraine. The West accuses Moscow of allowing troops to cross the border and even providing weapons to the rebels. He said if Western countries have proof, they should put it on the table. He likened the situation to 2003 in Iraq, when the U.S. said it had solid evidence of weapons of mass destruction, only to later be proven wrong. But he did say that if Ukraine's president-elect, Petro Poroshenko, plans to join the NATO military alliance, that would be a matter of concern for Russia. Yesterday, Poroshenko met with Western leaders in Poland. He rejected a call from Ukraine's interim government to introduce martial law in the rebellious East. He said he would instead offer amnesty and early regional elections. Meanwhile, in eastern Ukraine, pro-Russian insurgents continue to capture more government buildings in a series of humiliating defeats of the country's beleaguered armed forces. In the town of Sverdlovsk on the border with Russia, separatists forced Ukrainian guards out of their base. A rebel Cossack fighter said they want to create a humanitarian corridor that would allow civilians to flee to Russia to escape the fighting. Alan Bukniat, TVB News.
Incumbent Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has won the country's wartime presidential election. The landslide win means Assad will serve a third 7-year term in office. But as James Aiken reports, the vote is being widely dismissed as a farce.
Thousands of supporters of Bashar al-Assad flooded the streets of the capital, Damascus, to celebrate his re-election. Assad's victory was a foregone conclusion. He won more than 88% of the votes, while his two challengers together managed less than 8%, with voter turnout put at about 73%. The election victory comes amid a 3-year-old uprising against his rule that has devastated the country. The opposition and its Western allies call the election a farce.
The elections are a great big zero. They're meaningless. You can't have an election where millions of your people don't even have an ability to vote, where they don't have an ability to contest the election, and they have no choice.
Ce scrutin n'a aucune valeur.
At the G7 summit, French President François Hollande said the vote has no value while massacres continue in Syria. In an interview with French television, Russian President Vladimir Putin said he fears Syria could be partitioned. He insists on maintaining what he calls the legitimate power to avoid having Syria become a kind of new Afghanistan. China and Russia have both vetoed Western efforts to set UN penalties on Assad. Today, President Xi Jinping repeated a call for the formation of a transitional government. Meanwhile, the UN says the level of violence on the ground is rising.
We have seen a marked increase in the indiscriminate use of barrel bombs by the government, mortar attacks by opposition groups, poisonous gases allegedly used against civilians, and the collective punishment of civilians.
Amos says medical aid is only reaching 7% of the people who need it, with at least 90,000 being denied medical assistance. China has offered more aid, and the U.S. has just announced additional humanitarian assistance. But Assad's election win makes it likely that fighting will continue in a protracted conflict that has killed more than 160,000 people. James Aiken, TVB News.
And still ahead in our newscast, organizers gearing up for the July 1st rally. Police officers gunned down in eastern Canada. And the Kings draw first blood in the Stanley Cup Finals.
I want to break up with you this month.
What? Why? Is there someone else?
No, wait. 32!
You're such a promiscuous...
Shut up and look in the nearest mirror. You are no Cristiano Ronaldo, Casillas, Ozil, or even Neymar.
Hey,